And good afternoon, everybody. It is week 14 of the Leadership Academy in our regular scheduled 12 noon Friday lunch and learn series. Today, again, we have an outside guest, Sandra Lee Lester, who I had the pleasure of meeting in our lunchroom chat a couple of weeks ago. And similar to what I like to do is thinking outside of the box, stretching our imaginations. I thought it was really appropriate time to bring this subject up as we are doing our business planning as part of both financial aspect as well as strategy in your current environment. I think this topic will help you see that there is something beyond the horizon, and it is important that we need to use our leadership skills to both be conscientious as well as look into the future for greater opportunities. So without any further ado, Sandra, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it. She's in a balmy, very warm Canada, similar to us. Looking forward to some snow and ice. Take it away. It's all yours.
Thanks, Walter. Today, I wanted to speak to you all about enabling high performance in healthcare facilities and doing that through conscious decision-making and leadership. I wanted to tell you, first of all, where I'm coming from. I have a degree in architecture, worked as a designer for 15 years before going into sustainable buildings consulting. So I'm a LEED accredited professional, a certified sustainable building advisor, and a certified passive house designer. So when you think about sustainable buildings, you probably think about LEED certification or energy efficiency, and green buildings so that they have less impact on the environment. And what I'm going to do is use one case study today and focus on 3 aspects of that case study. This is a project that I worked on a few years ago. I'm just trying to turn the page. It was working. Oh, there we go. All right. All right. So first of all, I wanted to just kind of set the tone for the presentation. And it's difficult right now because we're in the middle of a crisis, and with our healthcare system and the COVID-19 pandemic. But I wanted to always say that it's important to be optimistic. So how do you prepare for the worst but hope for the best? And I think that key in creating a future for humanity is to be optimistic. So I put this quote in there: optimism is a strategy for making a better future. Because if you don't believe that the future can be better, you are unlikely to get up and take responsibility for making it so. So it's up to all of us as leaders to make a better future for ourselves, to learn from the past and really grow from the past, and then take leaps and bounds into a new future that wants to emerge. I worked on this healthcare facility a number of years ago. It's very large. As you can see, there's a lower podium level and then the tower up behind it. It's the largest hospital in my province, which is an equivalent to a state. Very large budget, and 656 beds in the hospital. So my role on this project was to look at the sustainability, what's called the quote unquote sustainability requirements for the hospital. And in that, I took a very strong focus on the energy efficiency, the indoor environmental quality, and the resiliency aspects of it. So it's one of the most energy efficient hospitals in North America, and I'll go into some reasons why. And then I'll talk to you about how the indoor air quality connects to the resiliency aspect of the hospital, especially with pandemics. So this is one of the healthiest hospitals in North America as well. What happened was we took normal hospital design and we started shifting around the money. So the standard wall assembly is pretty flimsy when it comes to the Canadian climate. We have really cold winters and we have hot and humid summers. So we actually bumped up the performance of the walls and the windows, and that helped to reduce the amount of loads in the hospital. So when fresh air is going through this room, essentially it doesn't get overheated and it doesn't get too cold in the winter. The reason for that, even though it faces south, is that it has electrochromatic glazing in the windows. So they automatically tint, just like my sunglasses tint. I hold my sunglasses up to the light. I think these are the ones that tint. These are my reading glasses, but I like working outside when it's a beautiful day. And now you'll see that they have a tint to them, right? So just like my sunglasses tinted very quickly, these windows will tint in response to the light. And that was cheaper to do than to put blinds on the window. And it's cheaper to do than to put interstitial blinds in the window, because those old interior blinds, they get dusty and covered in stuff, and becomes an infection control issue, especially with the poles on the blinds. So all of this, was done with a robust view on, like, if there's another pandemic. Toronto had SARS in 2003, right? And we learned a lot from dealing with SARS, and then we implemented a lot of measures into hospital design since then. And this hospital was designed in 2010, so only 7 years after SARS. And then we upgraded the interior finishes. We didn't want people getting sick from the chemicals that are off-gassed in the room. They're already dealing with cancer. They're already dealing with an illness. They don't need to be dealing with toxins and that additional stress that's needed to deal with it. And then that would slow down the recovery times after operations. Anything that stresses a patient out affects their immune system. So how do we design a room that has fresh air that's as fresh as the outdoors, and actually fresher, because we put 100% fresh air ventilation through this room. That means there's no mixing of air with the old stale air from other parts of the hospital. And we put air filters on it. So the air in this room is going to be fresher than the air outside if there was a forest fire smoke that we're dealing with, or any other sort of environmental toxins in the air, like pollution from traffic. There's a great big huge highway that's pretty close by, so a lot of particulates suspended in the air from that. And then we recovered the heat from it. And there's a little story about this, and then the other slides will go more quickly, but the president of the hospital of Humber River was really hesitant about this fresh air ventilation and heat recovery system. And he said, I don't get it. Like, I don't get how you can get the heat out of air and put it into the incoming air during the middle of winter and not have the viruses cross over, right? So you're exhausting this air, but you want to get the heat out, but not the viruses and not the contaminants. How does that work? So there's a technology called an enthalpy wheel, and over the last 15 years or so, it's been taken from smaller scale buildings and then ramped up, and now you can even use it in hospital. So it's called enthalpy wheel because it not only transmits the energy from like the latent heat load, but also the moisture load of the air, right? So it works better in humid environments like our hot, humid summers. But he was skeptical about it. He's like, I don't know. I can't stand behind this. This doesn't make any sense. So I actually took him on this beautiful sunny -10 day, -10 Celsius. What's that, like 30, about 23 degrees? I don't know. It was dang cold. And we went up to Earth Rangers just northwest of the city, and they had an enthalpy wheel that was about 8 feet high. And you could actually, it was a demonstration place. So you could actually stand on one side of the enthalpy wheel and the air was -10, and you could stand on the other side of the enthalpy wheel and the air was almost room temperature. And you could feel the difference between the two. And then he looked at it's basically a series of plates that go around the whole wheel. And then the air never touches each other, but the air touches the plates. So the warm air warms the plates, and the cool air picks up the warmth from the plate. And that's how we get the energy and how we get the moisture going through, but we don't get the viruses and the bacteria that could otherwise spread. It's important when you're actually trying new things to see, feel, touch, prototype, and test, and then like really learn from that, from a smaller example before you lay it out in a $2 billion hospital, right? So another example is like low flow urinals. Some of them work, some of them don't work so well, right? So really like getting something in to test, get people to use it, get feedback from your users. Is this working for you? What's it doing in the long term? Is all of that urine going down the pipe in a concentrated level going to corrode the pipe? Prototype, test. And this is what we do naturally as designers, but doesn't get done as much in the in organizational environments. So just look down at the bottom. I added some of the awards that the hospital won. It was the Gold Award for Modern Healthcare Design Award, the winner of the CAGBC Greater Toronto Chapter Award, and winner of Engineering News Records Best Global Healthcare Project. And it really, people are studying it now and say, how did they get to do all of this stuff? And I'll show you the secret to that, of how I managed to implement this on a hospital that was only supposed to be LEED silver. So it was a matter of nudges that completely changed the trajectory. Right now, NASA is launching in December a little tiny satellite that will go off into space and meet up with these 2 asteroids. And it is going to throw itself into one of the asteroids at 34,000 kilometers an hour and try and nudge that asteroid and change its trajectory a little bit. So if a little tiny probe from Earth can nudge a trajectory, then what can you do on your projects? What opportunities do you have for changing the outcome of where everything is going within your organization? This doesn't have to be for green building design. It can be, you know, maybe you're trying a new way of triaging in the emergency room. Maybe you're thinking about implementing something with your staff and you just don't know how it's going to go. And you might want to try like a little small nudge and just find out what the results are going to be. I believe in systems thinking. So systems thinking means that a butterfly flying in Brazil could cause a rainstorm, like a tornado in Wisconsin a week later. Like small things can make big differences. So the 3 focus areas were back to the 3 focus areas: energy efficiency, indoor environmental quality and resiliency. So they thought that a LEED Silver hospital was going to essentially stop the money from going out the window. They kept getting these energy bills for their current facilities that were hundreds of thousands of dollars every month, and it was just going out the window. And they looked at it and like, why can't we get a more efficient building so that we can spend more on of the provincial money? Like we have a government hospital insurance plan, so everything goes back to the government to pay for, right? If we spend less on the operations, then we can spend more on healthcare. And they thought that LEED Silver would be a good measure. They thought that they would get an energy efficient hospital if they use like a LEED measure of success on it, but it's not a good measure of success. What we used instead was an energy use intensity target. So meaning that how much energy do you need to use, which is the equivalent kilowatt hours per square meter or per square foot in 1 year. So on an overall level, not just what LEED does is it takes an ordinary hospital and then you put a little bit better windows on it and a bit better mechanical systems on it, and it's, comparatively it's a little bit better. What an energy use intensity target does is it gets away from the comparison and says, this one, like a regular hospital would have been like this, and then the new hospital using an energy use intensity target might look like a completely different configuration, right? So it's really that out of the box thinking. How do you get the design team to look at what's important? How do you measure success is what the biggest message I want to bring to you is the way of measuring success on whatever you want to achieve, is that going to work in order to move everybody and achieve what you wanted to get? The next one is healthy indoor environmental quality. So a lot of patients right now are trying to get well in spaces that are, really thermally stressful. They have a lot of glare, they have a lot of overheating, they're cold because they're sitting right next to a window. And then they're breathing in that toxic air. We all know about sick building syndrome, and if you don't control the materials that are put in the environment, the standard materials will off gas and produce that toxic environment. And again, they thought that LEED Silver was going to be a good way to measure success about it, but it's mediocre. At the time, the Green Guide for Healthcare was being developed in the United States, really great work. And that got adapted and embraced as LEED for healthcare. So we used the indoor environmental qualities and the material restrictions for that instead of using the standard LEED measure of success. So discovering what is possible for the project. And then high levels of hygiene, that is a building science technical term about the creation of damp surfaces. So there's some really detailed scientific work that we can do to figure out what the indoor temperature of a window surface would be, and whether it would collect moisture or not, and whether it would create toxic black mold. And that's what we saw in the old days in the 50s of, we're creating all these buildings. Yeah, they were cheap to build in the beginning, but now we're having to deal with all these mold issues and other toxins. So there's actually scientific ways to design buildings that will predict how they perform over the long term. And then the last section is resiliency. So We learned a lot from SARS. We knew that infection control and pandemic emergency strategies had to be implemented easily in the hospital. How do you do that in a conventional hospital? Well, you designed by ward, right? And you say, okay, this is going to be the pandemic ward if a pandemic happens, right? But that has real limitations because each ward is associated usually with its own mechanical system, and it's a lot of mixed air that happens within those wards. Well, the new way of designing in Europe is to use 100% fresh air ventilation. And what that does is it pulls the fresh air in, filters it, delivers it low and slightly cooler than ambient air temperature, allows it to heat up and rise, and then you pull it out at the top of a room once it's heated and has been contaminated by the people in that room. So this is actually called displacement ventilation. Just imagine for the moment, if you can see my glass, that you have that this is a teapot with a spout, and you're pouring cold water down the spout, and the cold water will actually displace or move the warmer water up and fill the glass. So we got them to implement 100% fresh air ventilation. It meant that any ward, any room could be a pandemic ward or room. And what we're seeing right now in our existing hospitals is a lot of temporary exhaust systems, a lot of temporary ducting systems, a lot of like it's a spaghetti factory of ducts, just trying to keep them ventilated properly and pressurized properly, so that the air from those COVID rooms don't get into the hallway and infect other people in the hospital that still need to be treated for other issues. So the lesson in this one really is that out of the box question, what can we do now that would save us a fortune later on? And that needs to be asked on a continuous basis. And if you don't have thinkers in the room that think differently, and you need those creative types, right? You need somebody from outside to drop in, kind of see what's going on, and then say, what if? Or have you thought of, or if we're making a decision about that now, what does that mean in 10 years time, 20 years time? Here's an example. A lot of people are putting mechanical systems in their buildings, and they're not looking at future climate projections. We have models of the Earth and the future climate, and how, for example, I'm working on a project in Vancouver, and it's going to become much hotter summers, longer summers, but actually the key here is a lot more humidity, right? So we were thinking of putting these radiant cooling panels in the building, and I said to the engineers, can you model that with our future humidity level projections for 2035? And they were one of the top engineering firms in North America, and they had never heard of that before. Like, who wants to rip out their mechanical systems in 20 years just to be able to take the loads or the humidity levels or the severe weather events that we're going to be facing at that time? What a waste of money that would be. So what can you do now that would save us a fortune later? So in a summary, what we did was we shifted capital investment into the building envelope. This is like a really good green building strategy. It's the basis of green building strategy. Build a better building so you need to heat or cool it less. We enabled patients to heal faster and we shortened hospital wait times. We achieved success on their terms. So instead of saying LEED Silver was their definition of success, we really pulled it apart. And then I figured out ways to measure success on that project that were better. And you'll also hear like key performance indicators. And so don't just brush over your key performance indicators on a project, like really, really have a discussion about them. And don't assume that what you used to measure success 5 years ago is going to work now, because the world has changed. And then another key to this project was getting the 2 ministries in our province to talk to each other. So one of them was building the hospital and one of them was operating it. And what we did was we pulled these siloed organizations, and I'm sure you all have siloed organizations within your healthcare communities, right? We pulled them together and we said, can we talk about our overall budget for building and operating this building and decide how we would better spend our money? So they used a net present value assessment to judge whether the investments would produce better future outcomes. And this was really key to bringing it back to dollars and cents, but having a way to assess those dollars and cents over the long term. And healthcare, like these healthcare organizations want to be around for the long term. Our government wants to be solvent for the long term. So this type of assessment is like really key to producing better outcomes. So some questions for you to use on your projects. What is possible? Are standard ways of measuring success good enough? And what can we do now that would save us a fortune later? Again, keep in mind that they're all nudges that completely change the trajectory. Do you want to hit the moon? Do you want to leave Earth, hit the moon? Or do you want to go to Mars? If you decide, then you can make a conscious decision every way along the project to make sure that you're going in the right direction and you're going to actually achieve your mission on the project. Thank you. And that's my contact details. Feel free to email me, Sandra at affectingchange.com. I'd love to help you with your built environment projects or change management things as well.
Thank you, Sandra, for a very interesting presentation. And team, this is exactly the reason why I thought it was a good opportunity to bring this in. In the end of the program, we talked about financial planning, when we're talking about capital planning next week and understanding the value of the projects. But again, it goes back to, none of us are going to build a hospital, but inside of the hospital, there are tons of separate processes for which you are responsible and you are currently working on. And that you see, we hold through to understanding the scope of the project and understanding how things are done today, forcing yourself to stretch your thinking beyond what you think is even possible or into the future to stay ahead of the times. And it all comes back to these key performance indicators and understanding how to measure both the driver metric and the outcome metric in order to get the ball across the finish line and having a material impact. So continue to stretch, right? Continue to not just be satisfied with the first thing that you come up, the first solution that you see, but rather keep pushing the envelope until you have the right solution for the right time for your patients, for your department. And I think that, as evidence with Sandra, you can build a hospital of the future. It's likely going to be able to sustain and provide a really good environment for patients and for patients to heal in, not only for fresh air, but also better sleeping. And hopefully the food was also improved at the facility to have even better outcomes. So thank you, Sandra. I'm going to stop the recording at this point.